Hello everyone, Faith here and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to make this super cute cherry red beret. This project takes just about an hour to finish, maybe quicker if you follow along quickly and slower if you're a new beginner. However, it is perfect for a beginning project. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. I make new videos every week and stick around to the end. The materials you'll need to complete today's project is weight 4 red and white yarn, a 4mm crochet hook and darning needle if you prefer to sew in your ends that way, a tape measure, and some scissors. I don't keep track of the exact yardage that I use for every project, but I use about a quarter skein of this red yarn and a little tiny bit of white yarn. If you refer back to the start of the video, those little tiny stitches at the last row that you'll be doing is all of the white you'll need, so trust me, you do not need a lot, nowhere near as much as what I'm showing right now. I also recommend you keep a notebook to keep track of what row you're on. Today's pattern features not only the steps, but also a small diagram on the right page to help you keep track of what you're doing. Please zoom in, pause, do whatever you need to do to take screenshots, so that way you don't have to keep rewinding the video to come back to this. I also recommend you follow the video closely and then use this as a guide if you're lost at any point in time. Also, as we go, if you have a bigger head than I do, and I have a pretty big head, you can totally readjust the amount of stitches you put into each row, or just the amount of rows that you're doing, which I'll explain a little bit more in depth later. Keep in mind that I'll also show each step and row that we're on in the top left-hand corner of the video. For row 1, you're going to be making a magic ring and then filling it with 10 double crochets. If you've never done a magic ring before, you simply loop it around 2 fingers, and then take your hook and insert it underneath of the bottom piece of yarn, pulling the top piece through and spinning it around. Do 1 chain here, and then your magic ring is done. Once you're done your magic ring, you will simply put 10 double crochets inside that giant hole you just made. After you've done all 10 double crochets, I recommend that you count to make sure that you have enough. As you can see, I'm counting the top of each stitch. This is a really good indicator of where they are as opposed to just trying to count each line on the inside. When you know you have 10, pull your tail and then search for the first double crochet you made. You're going to insert your hook into the top of that stitch and then do a slip stitch to connect that to the other end to make your circle. Once you've done this, if you would like to, you can pull the tail again to make sure that everything is super tight. But if not and you want to keep it a little bit looser, leave it the way it is. Double crochet 2 afterwards, which is the same thing we'll be doing in every row, and then you're ready to move on to your next row. If you're using stitch markers, I'd recommend using one now. For row 2, you're going to expand the size of your circle. This is done by adding an increase into each and every stitch from the row before. Increase is simply putting 2 or more stitches into the one you already have. In this case, you'll be doing 2 double crochets in each of the following stitches. Once you've made it back to the start, you're going to look for that same first double crochet and then insert another slip stitch in. Because this hat is circular, you'll be doing this sort of step at the end of every single row, doing a slip stitch followed by 2 double crochets. Row 3 starts the beginning of the pattern we'll be using to expand the rest of the hat. This sort of pattern consists of switching back and forth between double crochets and double crochet increases. In this row specifically, you'll be doing 1 double crochet followed by 1 double crochet increase all the way around until you get to the other side. Again, now that you're at the end, you're simply going to slip stitch and chain 2. At this point, you'll really start to see the distinction between each of the rows as well. You can see that they have cute little circles in between. At this point in the project, there should be 3 rows and 30 double crochets in the final row that we just did. So if you want to go back and count to make sure that you're on track, I recommend doing so. The easiest way to count, like I said before, is to use the tops of the stitches and go from one end to the other. For row 4, you're going to be double crocheting 2 and then doing your increase and then repeating all the way around. From this point on, I'm going to be speeding through these sort of increase rows, but I will check in with you to make sure you know which step you're on as we go through. Next is row 5, and here you'll be doing 3 double crochets before your increase. If you ever freak out and think that you've lost your spot, or maybe you put the project down for a few hours and came back to it, You can always remember what row you're on by looking at the amount of little circles that you have. Similarly to this, you can also make sure you're on the right amount of double crochets by looking into the stitch itself and seeing how many stitches you've put into it. If you look up close, it'll actually be really easy to see which places you've put in 1 stitch and which ones you've put in 2 stitches. For row 6, you'll be doing 4 double crochets, then your increase, and then repeating it all the way around. Row 7 will be 5 double crochets, then your increase, and then repeating. Another little tip is just to think that if you're doing 5 double crochets, then you're on row 7 because you just added 2 to that number. This is because our first row was the magic ring and our second row was the full increase row. Row 8 has you doing 6 double crochets and then your increase, and then repeating afterwards. I know it might be taking a minute to get around your whole circle now, but you are almost done with this part of the hat. For row 9, you will be doing 7 double crochets followed by your increase. This is your final row for this increasing part of the pattern, so push through it. It'll take a second to get around the whole circle, but it'll be worth it in the end. This is also where I want to add that if your head is a little bit bigger, you might want to expand by another row or 2. You can also now measure it against your head after this row is done and see if it's a little too big for you. If it's too big, then undo a row or 2 and go from there. Now that you've finished all of these increase rows, I recommend you take out a tape measure and see about how big the hat actually is. If you followed the exact steps that I did, it'll be about 9.5 inches in diameter. Like I had mentioned before, if you either increase or decrease the amount of rows that you had, this number will be either bigger or smaller than mine is. Now that your hat is the size you want it to be, row 10 is going to be 1 row of double crochets all the way around. This will add a little bit of height to the beret before we start closing up the hole that your head is going to fit in. And just like before, you'll end your row with a slip stitch and a chain 2. A quick note, if you want your beret to be a little bit thicker or taller, you can add more than 1 double crochet all the way around row. I don't personally recommend it, but this is obviously to your taste, so do whatever you please. Row 7 will depend on what row you left off on when you were doing your increases. If your last row was 7 double crochets, then 1 increase, you'll be doing what I'm doing here. Simply, you'll be continuing but backwards, now doing 7 double crochets followed by 1 decrease. This is to make the band of the hole where your head is going to go a little bit smaller. If you've never done a decrease before, it's the same as a double crochet, but inserting it through one loop and through the back of the following loop. This kind of minimizes those 2 stitches into just 1, making it smaller across the board. Row 11 will be to double crochet 6 and then decrease, or just 1 less than the last row. If this helps you, inside of the directions, I listed exactly how many double crochets you need for each row with the increases and decreases. I also have a little guide that shows you how many rows you need, so please look back to that if you need it. Row 13, or second to last row, will introduce our little white stitches. You'll be doing 5 double crochets and then your white decrease. To do this, when you get to your 4th double crochet with your red, you'll simply double crochet as you normally would, but this time leave the top part open. That's where your color switch is going to go. Color switching this way gets rid of the weird diagonal that normally comes from switching at the finished double crochet as opposed to doing it in the middle. That little top part of the stitch will now be white for just this one as opposed to being white in the one afterwards. Once you've done the first part of the double crochet of your white stitch, you'll switch back to red the same way you switched to white in the first place. This just gives you one uniform up and down stitch as opposed to having those weird diagonals or a very just unfinished looking color switch. Please rewatch this part as many times as you need, just because it can be a little bit confusing if you've never switched colors this way. You'll continue this exact pattern all the way around until you get to the other side. Once you've made it all the way around, you'll have these little white lines connecting all those stitches together. Do not worry about them, you simply are just going to not see them when you flip the hat inside out. From this point, you're going to cut your extra white yarn that's left over, and then we'll tuck in the ends whenever you want, however way you like to do it. This marks the start of row 14, which is simply just a chain 1 and then do half double crochets all the way around. A half double crochet is very simple. All you do is yarn over once, push through, and then pull through all 3 loops. It's basically the same as a double crochet, but pulling through just 1 time as opposed to 2. This method gives you a cute little hem at the bottom of your hat, as opposed to doing 1 entire new row. Once you're done with row 14, you can do 1 chain and then cut your red yarn. Pull it through and then weave in this end however you like, but this part of your hat is officially done. To use the darning needle, I recommend using a much larger piece of yarn than what I cut off. I'm just going to be doing this a little differently, but what you would do is just put the yarn through the needle itself and then sew it in the way you would traditionally sew anything with thread. I'm not the biggest fan of this method. I prefer to use the hook, which I'll show you how to do in a second. When weaving and using your hook, you simply choose some spots on the inside of the hat and then pull through using this tiny piece of yarn. Once you've taken care of any ends that are sticking out, we're going to use the tail of the magic ring we started with to make that little tip thing that's on the top of those cute berets. Simply use your hook to pull the tail all the way through, and I'll show you how to make a new chain using this piece in a second. Lay the hook down and lay the yarn down as well with your finger over top of it and your hook below it. Pull the yarn over your finger through the hole you just made like so. You'll pull this piece of yarn tight and then hold it down with your finger again to make another loop and then pull through to make your chain. I made 5 chains here, but if you want the thing to be a little bit bigger or smaller, you can adjust accordingly. Be very gentle with this part because it is a little bit finicky, but if you do it correctly, it comes out really cute. So after your 5 chains, or however many you do, pull the yarn all the way through, like so. Now reinsert your hook underneath and pull the tail of that all the way through. Don't worry if you accidentally pull the whole piece through, because you can just pull it back out afterwards like I did here on accident. Be a little bit more gentle than I was, and you can do it in 1 try. Readjust your piece, pull it taut just to make sure it doesn't look all bubbly, and then try again, this time just lightly pulling through. Going about this a little more carefully the second time, I successfully am able to pull it through and then have that cute little tip pointing out of the top. Now you can weave in the rest of the end of the magic ringtail. Simply do it however you like, but again, I just like to use my hook to pull it through, tie a knot, and then cut off the remaining excess. And with that, you are done with your hat. Thank you so much for watching this video, and for that little announcement that I promised later, next week I'll be making the matching bag. So please stay tuned to next week, subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye!